Hey guys, what is up? Niad here with Film Comics Explained. I hope you guys have been well. We are back today with the third volume of Aliens Fire and Stone. When we left off, the camp had been divided into two groups. Half of them thought it was a good idea to follow Kale into battle, and the other half still think it's best to listen to Dion and fortify their defenses. What we will come to find is that their inability to choose one or the other could potentially spell out their downfall. While they are trying to decide what to do next, Russell has further distanced himself from the group by setting up camp in an isolated cave in the hills. He is less concerned about their survival and more interested with his research. As we return to LV-223, almost 4 months have passed. We have 3 members of the group who are foraging for food. One of them asks the other 2 whether they have noticed that everything around the black goo seems to grow in a weird way. Ramona suggests that they catch the bat-like creatures as an alternative to eating the awful monkeys. And the other says that he's basically become a vegetarian as they take a closer look at the plants that have mutated. At that moment, they hear the sound of a branch snapping behind them. Louise, who is now fused with a Xenomorph, springs out of the bushes. He grabs one of them as the other 2 run off in a panic. Ramona yells out "No!" several times as she makes her escape. And that's the thing about this accelerant. It basically reorganizes the genetic code to recreate life. Ramona has made it back to the fence of their camp and yells for help. Dion asks what's wrong with her, and Kale questions where the other 2 are as the mutated Louise breaks through their fence. What we see is Louise grab one of them and kill him with his xeno teeth as they come out and penetrate the back of the guy's neck. 2 young survivors look on in horror as they ask if that was Louise. We can see that this mutation has given him incredible power as he's able to take out 2 campers at the same time. Everybody is fleeing as Dion tries to organize a plan to stop it. She tries to order Kale to do something, but what we notice is that he disappears into the distance. Russell is watching all of this take place with curiosity rather than fear. The creature lets out a gruesome dual screech. In that instant, we see a spear coming out of the mouth of Louise and realize that Kale had ended him. I'm sure you thought that he had run away as a coward. I know I sure did. After Louise collapses, Kale begins to break down, saying that he was sorry. Dion comes in and tries to reassure him that it wasn't his fault and that he essentially did what he had to do to protect the group. It's here that Kale confesses. He tells her that the whole dilemma was his fault. Dion asks what he means as he begins to explain. He tells her that he had seen the aliens enter the cargo hold of the Onager when they took off from Hadley's Hope. He also explains that if he had said anything, they would have uncoupled the cargo containers, leaving him behind. The group is visibly angry and distressed at this. He goes on to say that he was afraid and just wanted off the rock. He figured that they could leave the cargo hold sealed when they arrived and didn't anticipate that they would have any problem. But of course, he was wrong. He begs them to believe him. What we then see is Dion come in for an epic punch. She tells him that he is responsible for the deaths of all of their friends and family here and says that she will kill him. Now they restrain her. She tells them that they could have been safe here and that they could have been rescued by now. Instead, they are practically starving while those aliens pick them off one by one. Kale agrees that it is his fault and that he takes full responsibility, but still thinks he has a plan. He tries to convince a few of them to join him to get supplies and the transmitter for an evac. This is a drastic last attempt, with Dion saying he will get them all killed again. What we see though is one of the group saying that he is in, as others also begin to join. I think it's interesting to note that although Russell's opinion is respected and he is by far the smartest person in the group, he hasn't offered any advice or counsel. He has returned to his cave, which he tells the rover he's beginning to like. We can see that Russell's deliberate isolation from the group has caused him to go a little loopy. I mean, he is talking to a rover that cannot communicate back here. He tells it that every answer he finds seems to raise more questions. Russell has surmised that the terraforming equipment he saw on the alien ship would take centuries to create a biosphere as diverse as this, but this seems to have happened over decades. He questions how advanced the alien ship could be, postulating whether it might or might not have time travel capabilities. He has noticed the topography of the moon is constantly changing as the mountains seem to keep getting bigger. He is stumped for answers as he looks out of his new home into the distance. What we then see is the salvage operation in action. Cale has gathered 3 men to join him, and we see them gathered outside. Cale has gathered 3 men to join him, and we see them gathered outside the onager. The coast looks clear as Cale tells them to open the hatch. They cautiously enter and find a gun among other supplies. Cale notices a pool of black blood. As he follows the direction of the blood, he sees something that terrifies him. What he can see is that he was wrong. There is an alien queen that is laying eggs on board the onager. She must have snuck on from Hadley's Hope and was the reason there were so many aliens now. This also explains why some of the Xenomorphs were dragging people away instead of killing them. They were basically bringing them back here to be impregnated by the facehuggers to create more aliens. We see that the aliens have been alerted as they start to scream. Cale tells the men to go out and carry out what they had planned. They are essentially engaging the aliens in combat. One of them is taken out as his mate kills the Xenomorph with a lucky swing of his hammer. Cale tells him to hold them off as he goes for the transmitter. We see Cale find it as his friend shoots an alien that was about to get him. However, the blood from the alien lands on Cale's friend, burning his face in the process. Now, the plan seems to be working as Cale dashes off with the transmitter, but just as he exits the onager, he is pulled back by one of the aliens. Cale drops the transmitter in accelerant that splashes back on his face as he is pulled back to the ship. He was so close! I honestly thought he was going to make it. I also think that this shows Cale was basically right all along. They got this close to getting the transmitter with only 4 of them. Imagine what they could have achieved if they sieged the onager early on when they had more numbers. We return to Russell, who was doing more research on the black goo. He notes that it clearly affects an organism's genetic makeup, but isn't simply a mutagen. It's more like an accelerant. He has done extensive study on the plants and indigenous life forms on the moon, and seen the effect the goo has had on them. Russell then begins to ponder what the effect would be if it were to be mixed in with human DNA. We return to the camp, and a day has passed since Cale and the others had made an attempt for the onager. The group assumed that they had met with their deaths. Dion reassures the survivors that the aliens hadn't found their camp yet, and hopefully might never will. She tells them all to go to bed as they have heaps of work to complete the next day and could all use a good night's sleep. While Dion is asleep, she hears a voice from outside her tent which says, "Dion, sorry." There is a sound of a branch snapping outside as she gets up and hears the voice say, "Sorry again." It sounded very familiar, which leads Dion to poke her head out and ask if it was Cale that was out there. What we then see is the back of Cale, which looks slightly deformed, as he says sorry and approaches her. Dion is clearly distraught as she yells at him to get away from her. We get a look at his face and hands to see that he has already undergone a mutation due to the accelerant, as he yells out sorry and reaches for her. What we see next is the downfall of the camp. The fences have been trampled and the Xenomorphs are attacking the survivors in large numbers. We see the group try and head to higher ground, but they essentially were not ready for this. They were all in bed, lulled into a false sense of security. I don't understand why they didn't have any guards on the watchtowers. We see the ghoulish figure of Cale dragging the body of Dion. He looks at his friends being attacked and is visibly trying to fight the effect of the accelerant on his behavior. He has basically led the aliens back here, although he has tried to fight it. He keeps saying, "So sorry," to the dying survivors before finally succumbing to the transformation and letting out a terrifying scream. We see Dion's lifeless body collapse on the floor, as Russell asks the rover if it had heard the screams. Russell then says, "I guess we know what became of Cale and the others," in a rather detached and inhuman way. He asks the rover if they knew where the cave was. He says he never told the group, and then asks the rover if it had divulged this information to any of the survivors. He asks it again if it would be honest with him, as we start to see that Russell is beginning to lose his mind. And that is the end of Volume 3. Ooh, I love this comic. It has truly encapsulated the gory and horrific elements of the Alien films we love, but has injected its own DNA into the mix. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. That is all we have time for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my content. I'm Niat with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.